So welcome everyone. My name is Margie James and I'm the chair for FAN. And on behalf of the board, I welcome you and we are glad you're able to join us this evening for our spring membership meeting on affordable housing. We do have public comment as part of this public meeting and we'll be doing it at the end of the meeting. So then with that, I want to thank all of our speakers who are sharing their evening with us. Steve Ochs is the Real Estate Development Director with Homes for Good. Beth Ochs is the Rent Assistance Division Director with Homes for Good. Dan Bryant, the Executive Director for SquareOne Villages. And Dan Hill is an architect and senior principal with Arbor South Architecture. And so we're really thankful for your sharing your evening with us and your experiences. So for that, Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks for coming to our talk on affordable homes, providing affordable housing. We're going to split it into two parts. First is sort of setting the stage. What is, okay, Dan's still trying. What's the situation we're in now? You know, what are the challenges and obstacles and the level of unmet need in our community for permanent supported, or not necessarily supported, but just permanent housing, not the temporary housing. And then in the second part, we're going to go into what kind of current projects are already happening. What is Homes for Good doing? Dan Bryant's group, SquareOne Villages, and then other possibilities that Dan Hill knows about, you know, like ADUs and things like that. So there was a couple of terms I wanted to get straight, make sure everybody knows before we get going. And one is the term AMI is probably going to come up, which means area mean income. Because to qualify for public housing, you have to be some percentage below AMI. So just want to make sure everybody knows that term, just gets thrown around. The other is HB 2001, which we're not going to really talk about tonight. It might get talked about in, in passing, but just make sure everybody's aware of the legislation that passed in 2019 that essentially eliminates the R1 single family zone in cities greater than 25,000 throughout Oregon. Anyway, so that on any lot where there's now a single family dwelling, you can allow at least a duplex. Okay, so we're going to start with Beth Ochs and Homes for Good, and then Dan and just.
So I'm Beth Ochs. I'm the Rent Assistance Division Director at Homes for Good. Homes for Good is Lane County's public housing agency. Our public housing agency is the second largest in the state of Oregon. Portland has the largest for our state. And I oversee the management and distribution of the tenant-based and project-based vouchers for Lane County. So those are I think what people commonly refer to them as Section 8. So Section 8 is sort of the generic term for what we provide. And I'll show you a couple slides here in a sec that will dig into that a little bit. I also oversee the project-based vouchers for Homes for Good. So those are the vouchers that are in particular developments, and the voucher stays with the property while the tenant-based vouchers move around with the family from unit to unit. So let me go ahead and share some information with you guys about our current needs in Lane County from the data that we've collected at Homes for Good. So can you guys see that chart about what the current need is for housing in Lane County?
I can't. Did you hit screen share? There we go. There you go.
Are you seeing that now?
Yep.
Great, awesome. So right now we have a little over 6,000 families on our wait lists in total. So those are a combination of families looking for housing choice vouchers, which is AKA Section 8. So those are folks that want to use the tenant-based voucher in the private rental market. We have 26% of those 6,700 families seeking project-based vouchers. So a project-based voucher is where the subsidy is tied to the unit. And when the family leaves the unit, the subsidy stays behind for the next family to come along. We also at Homes for Good provide affordable housing and multifamily housing, and that's housing that also stays with the unit, but is tied directly to that AMI that was referenced at the beginning of the meeting. And then public housing, which is also tied to particular units, is at 33.7%. So over Q1 of 2021, we have opened up several wait lists for different kinds of housing, public housing and affordable housing, and some project-based housing. And thus far, we have received 3,369 applications. So that I think definitely speaks to the need in our community. Each wait list that we open is only open for 1 week. And we have a dedicated phone line during that week that's staffed by about 35 different staff members at Homes for Good, so that when folks call in, they're reaching a live person to answer their questions. And we receive somewhere between like 200 to 300 calls during that time frame from folks asking about the waitlist application process. And then when the wait lists are closed, we receive about 100 phone calls a day asking about housing resources, when we're going to open a wait list, and how folks can obtain housing. So there's definitely a lot of need in our community. Through the year of 2020, while we have over 6,000 families looking for housing, we were able to provide housing to 299 families. So we're definitely only scratching the surface of being able to provide what's being in comparison to what's needed. So the 245 through the vouchers, that's a mix of tenant-based vouchers and project-based vouchers. Then we have 26 through public housing, 15 through multi, and 13 through affordable. And why those numbers are not higher is because it's the utilization is based on attrition for the most part. Steve will talk later about developments and new projects coming on, but for the most part, someone has to stop using the assistance in order for the assistance to become available for someone else. And the turnover does not come close to meeting the demand of what we need for housing in our community on the affordable front. So let me see if I can show you one more slide. Let me get to that really quick. All righty. Can you guys see that slide about who we're working with?
Yes.
All right. So the getting on the wait list, the coming to the top of the wait list and getting that subsidy is just one piece of the puzzle. Beyond that, there's a lot of paperwork that has to be processed for project-based vouchers and public housing. And then for tenant-based vouchers, those vouchers that need to be utilized on the private rental market, there's also a lot of assistance that's needed with like locating the housing, assistance with security deposits, rent arrears, utility deposits. So in our agency, we have partnerships with 32 different preferences within our tenant-based and project-based programs with 13 community partners. And we reach out and we connect with these agencies, and then we come to agreement about what they're going to be able to bring to the table, and then what we're going to be able to bring to the table in order to better serve families in our communities and help with deposits, or help with housing navigation, or help with lease violation issues when the tenant's actually in place, if things are going to crop up. So for example, we have a partnership with Laurel Hill. They really assist folks on getting on the wait list. And then once they are served off the wait list, then they help them with the paperwork. They access funds to help with deposits. And then they work closely with our intake team to understand all the paperwork and sort of do that hand holding that really helps people access the housing. We also, for example, have partnerships with sponsors, and they serve folks that are leaving incarceration, and they also work with landlords and build those relationships and work with any sort of potential lease violations. And so the partnership kind of questions we always ask when people reach out to us and say, well, I think our organization might be interested in being a local preference partner with Homes for Good, is we ask, how are you going to help with housing search and placement? And how are you going to help with housing stability? And those are the two kind of key factors we look for when we're trying to build those partnerships. And then what this allows, it allows us to provide housing in our community to higher barrier populations that wouldn't necessarily have access to housing if they were to just navigate all of this unassisted. So I don't want to take up more time than I was allotted. So I don't know, Pam, if you wanted to save all questions for the end and then just move on to the next presenter, or.
That's what we were thinking of doing, yeah.
Okay, all right, then I will stop screen sharing and give space for the next person.
So Dan, I guess, Dan Bryant, that would be you. You're muted. Dan, you need to unmute.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. I was talking to you. I have Dan on the phone here, so we're using FaceTime so he can see the screen when he needs to. Here's what he looks like.
He looks like he's up in heaven, all lit up.
So go ahead and talk to Dan. We'll see if they can hear you.
All right. Can you folks hear me okay?
I can.
Yes, they can.
Okay, great.
Now I can't.
So my question was that was posed to me is the challenges for builders, and obviously, you know, our company is not only an architecture firm, we're a development company and a construction company, so we get to see all sides of the development world, and I think you know, challenges are big in our industry, and I think, you know, when it comes to infill, you know, we're working through a process right now with the city, and many of you are obviously familiar with House Bill 2001 and how that's impacting neighborhoods like yours. And as we think about what this will look like, you know, the challenges come down to code issues, setback issues, design issues, and a couple of the bigger ones that I just want to touch on for a few minutes that I think pose the largest challenge for any meaningful addition of housing to existing neighborhoods, like the Friendly neighborhood, is related to infrastructure cost. A lot of times we'll have sites that are really wonderful sites, maybe oversized lots where there might be a cottage cluster or an ADU, you know, something like that. But what we find is the infrastructure, and when I say infrastructure, that means your sewer, your water, your power, your natural gas, if that's a desired resource for the lot. A lot of times these things are very difficult to actually get to the site, and the costs are quite extreme. So that's one of the bigger challenges that we face as we look at infill. Obviously, the other challenges that we see are related more on the fee structure side. Right now, at the last calculation of how what we call soft costs, which are your design, permits, engineering, planning fees, those are running in the 25% range right now, and so those are adding significant numbers to the cost of our housing. And then obviously this is a big one, and it's a little bit sensitive because I'm talking to a neighborhood, group right now is the challenge of neighborhood resistance. And these sometimes are some of the largest challenges that we have because people don't like change, or they don't want to see that kind of change in their neighborhood. So, neighborhoods that have resources can sometimes mount legal battles against development that they really don't want in their neighborhood. So these are I would say these are the three big ones that we face as developers, and looking at ways, to increase our housing stock. Many years ago, I was very active, and I still am very active in the Home Builders Association of Lane County, and we kind of foretold what was actually happening right now, that with our land supply being so restricted, that housing costs would go up in a dramatic way. And as we look at housing costs, they're pretty much out of the reach of about, I'm going to say 60% of our population. So that increases demand for rental housing. And a lot of that rental housing is in older homes, many like in your neighborhood that were built back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, some even earlier than that. And so that housing stock is getting more limited. And part of the reason it's getting limited is because people are going in and gentrifying neighborhoods. They're taking the process, or taking the route of creating new housing by possibly tearing down some of the old housing. And of course, anytime you do that, the price of housing goes up. That new housing is more expensive than the old housing that was on that property. So as we look at what's happened over the last 25 years in Eugene, we haven't paid really good attention to our housing needs, and more people are being pushed out of the opportunity to actually have home ownership. For a while there was a trend where more people were willing to rent, but that trend is actually changing right now too, where especially millennials are now interested in buying houses, where 10 years ago the attitude was we're really not in a place, or really don't have the desire. We want to be more transient in our housing needs. So these are some of the challenges that we face on the development side. So I think that's I don't know if I took 10 minutes there to explain that or not, but I'll just stop right there.
Perfect.
Great. So a good deal of what have I learned about housing, I learned from Dan Hill. The organizers didn't know this, but Dan and I go a long ways back. Dan, this is probably the craziest thing that we've done right now together, but at any rate, I'm a preacher by trade, so what the heck do I know about housing? But got involved in this nonprofit effort to build a new style of housing, and I'll talk about that in the second half of this. But what I would say, what I've learned through the building of the housing we've done, is the challenge, because the model of housing I'm going to share with you is unusual, innovative. The challenge is financing it, and banks are not familiar with our model. Finding funding, the primary funding source in the state of Oregon for most affordable housing comes through a state agency, Oregon Housing and Community Services, and they have a variety of different programs. A lot of their money comes from the federal government through HUD. Some of it comes from the state, but most of their programs are designed either for rental projects or for home ownership, and what we do is actually a hybrid of the two. So that presents some unique challenges. And our first housing project we financed entirely through charitable, just fundraising. And of course, it's very difficult to build housing that way. And when we did it, we figured we probably could only do it that way once, trying to raise that much money, about $1.8 million to build those 22 homes. And then the other challenge we have faced, because the style of our housing, again, is somewhat unique, using the popularity of the tiny home movement. Dan, we're getting feedback. I'm going to mute you. Is that there are just been some significant code issues with tiny homes that we've had to overcome, and so that has also been a challenge. That's enough for me for this portion. I'll say more when we get to the second half.
Hey, Dan, I just wanted to let you know, I actually was, for some reason, it just connected.
Ah, you're on!
Connected, so I am on with you folks. So
Good to see you.
It's a miracle.
So I guess we're right up for part two then, which is, what projects are happening, what's going on, and what plans are in the works for the future, and what are the possibilities beyond that. So I guess we can go in the same order. Would that be Steve this time? Steve?
Sure, I can kick it
Which
off
I
here.
have made you co-host, so you should be able to screen share.
Okay, let me give it a shot here. And I came very well prepared only because we just did a couple of weeks ago, we did a mini town hall. And so I have some slides to run through that I'll run through pretty quickly here because there's a lot of them. But I think I'll give a pretty good overview of kind of what we do and where we're headed. So so let me see here. I'm still there we go. Let me see. I'm at the very end of there we go. So Beth touched a lot on kind of the rental assistance side, and Homes for Good also, we also have a portfolio of about 1,633 units. About half of those are public housing, and that's what you kind of typically think of as affordable housing in the past. And most of that stock was built in the 60s and kind of ended about in the 80s. And so we serve, all of Lane County, so from Florence to Cottage Grove to Junction City. The bulk of our units are in Eugene Springfield area, and then we're also just doing a lot of development right now. The state and federal government have put, because of the housing crisis, there's really in the past few years been a lot of concentration on and getting new housing out there. And so, and then, and I guess a few other things that Homes for Good does is to also provides resident services. So that provides services for folks once they're in our housing, and food programs, youth programs, those kinds of things. We have a family self-sufficiency program, and that's been a very successful program that it really, helps coach people that are in our housing to set up savings accounts, and they even have incentives to do it and things like that. So that's been a great program, has gotten over the years, gotten a lot of people into home ownership and that kind of thing. And then we also have a weatherization program, which isn't typical for a housing authority, and weatherize about 250 homes a year. A lot of those are manufactured homes, and that's a very very needed and successful program. And then, Dan touched on that the Oregon Housing Community Services is, kind of the primary funding source. We also use, they put a variety of funds out through the state. We also go for a lot of other different grants and funds. And in recent years, and I'll talk about it a little more, is healthcare providers have gotten into the funding of housing because they're seeing the need for the kind of, I'll talk more about the permanent supportive housing side of things, which is housing with services for folks. And, Beth noted in her presentation all the partners we work with, and there are a lot. And in all of these cases, we couldn't do it with all the partners in the community we have. And we're actually very fortunate in Lane County to have a variety of great nonprofits, for-profit, and just a variety of people that really care about the community. So it makes things doable in our area that people can't replicate throughout the state. And so right now we have a lot of units that just recently completed construction or are just about to complete construction. We have, there's one on this timeline here that it's kind of that I wanted to touch on real quick, and it was called the Ochs at 14th, and that was a partnership with sponsors, which works with folks coming out of incarceration. So this facility was basically built with a preference for folks coming out of through their program. And they currently, when folks come out of the prison system, they offer transitional housing for them at a facility called the Roosevelt Crossing on Highway 99. And what the problem they saw was that they were successful in this transitional housing program, but then once people left there was no housing for them for a variety of reasons. And with a record, a lot of times it had to do with that. So they ended up falling right back into, either couch surfing with people that they you fell into problems with in the first place. And so this has been enormously successful, and it actually allows folks to, if they want to stay there as long, they're all one bedrooms, but they can stay there as long as they want. And sponsors offers on-site services for them and things like that. So that's been tremendously successful. And so we currently have 3 projects that had just finished up. And I'll just go ahead and jump and talk. Oh, and I'll real quick jump to just kind of the amount of units that we're looking at. And so, in the past, it was typical of doing a development about every other year or so. And then just lately, with the need for housing, we've increased the number of project developers we have, and are really trying to respond to the demand for housing. As everybody knows, there's a variety of that. We've also changed a little bit of our focus. So it used to be that we did really all family housing development, and we've really shifted focus to more permanent supportive housing, which is, and I'll talk in more detail about that, but basically that's housing for folks that comes with services. And we've really targeted folks coming out of homelessness, both individuals and families. So I'll jump down to our projects working on here. Recently completed is right across from the Graduate. We finished up Market District Commons, and it's a mixed use building. The ground floor just was purchased it's actually a 2-unit condominium. So OB companies purchased the ground floor, and then there's 50 units of housing. You can see all the partners it took to develop that. The 15 of the units are set aside for veterans coming out of homelessness and people with disabilities. So we partnered with the St. Vincent de Paul program, SSVF. I'm not exactly sure what that acronym stands for, but they work with veterans coming out of homelessness. And then Full Access works with folks with disabilities. And so for those 15 units, people that come through their program have preference and end up only paying a third of their income towards rent because of those project-based vouchers. Another fun project we were able to complete recently it's called Legion Cottages. And this was just 4 tiny homes on basically a residential parcel. City of Cottage Grove has made some great recent, and Dan mentioned codes. Those are a big, hindrance to this type of development. Typically, City of Cottage Grove has done some real great work in getting their code changed to allow for this kind of thing. And this was a partnership with the University of Oregon Builds program, where it was designed so that architecture students actually designed it. And then they were supposed to actually help build it also, but COVID hit about a week into construction. And so I think they got one wall up, and everybody left, and we had to end up having a construction company come in and help finish it up. But though this was also set aside for homeless veterans, and we worked with the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide housing in this case. And this lot was actually given to us by the American Legion in Cottage Grove. And so this lot's right behind the American Legion. So it was definitely a fun one to be involved with, and really sad that it happened through COVID. The comment on MLK. So this has been really our first foray into the permanent supportive housing, and it's called the Housing First model. And so the idea behind Housing First is that you get people into housing first, and then you deal with their whatever the underlying issues are that they're homeless. And so if that's whatever addiction that may be or anything like that. And so this building has the entire ground floor is supportive services, and so Lane County gave the land for this and is also kind of in charge of the supportive services and financing much of it. And then Shelter Care is providing supportive services. And it's 51 very small studio units, and it's geared for folks coming off the frequent user system engagements, what they call it. And it's folks that are interacting the most with police, with mental health facilities, with our medical facilities. And this is, we had 12 different funding sources that came into this. And you can see there, it was Peace Health, Kaiser Permanente, Pacific Source, Trillium, all gave a great deal both towards the building of this building and the service side of things, because they see the benefit of having this, being able to serve these folks in one place instead of touching all the different services. So it's very expensive for the community. It's expensive to build a building like this also and provide the services, but it's still just really a drop in the bucket, and much more beneficial to the people here and the community. It's also very challenging. We just started lease up of this in January, and we're about halfway full. And it's just very challenging because the folks aren't used to being in a residential environment. But we're very, with our partners, very committed to having this happen. And then we have some other future projects that we're hoping to replicate. And then we have 2 other developments that are almost done in construction, and these are coming online in early June. The first one's called Serang, and it is out on the backside of Willamette High School, and it's kind of right up against the football field. And the reason it's called Serang is the Korean church owned this property, and we bought the property from them, and they've been great neighbors. And Serang actually means love in Korean, so they helped to name this development. This is for families, and one of the great partnerships we made through this development was the Bethel School District. So they have their McKinney-Vento liaisons. They were dealing with a lot of homeless families coming through their school district and really don't have a lot they can offer them. What we were able to do is create a preference through the rental assistance program for folks that work with it's called the McKinney-Vento Act, which is it's a homeless liaison that works with each of the schools, and they're able to find families and refer them to this development. And then through that, they get a preference to live here. So that's been a great one. And this one's 49 units. And this next one is Hayden Bridge Landing, and it is located right next to Fred Meyer on 5th Street in Springfield. And it's 70 units. And so these 2 developments I'm referencing are both replacement housing for public housing that Homes for Good is selling. So we had 112 units that were single families and duplexes, homes that we had in our public housing portfolio that were just too expensive to manage anymore because they were spread out so much and we have to manage all of them. So through a HUD program called RAD, you can convert these to new buildings, and we're using the proceeds from the sales in order to finance this development. The great thing about that is that we were actually able to, we have up to about 9 or 10 folks from the public housing that lived in those homes that are actually, we've been working with them to get them into home ownership. And so they're actually being able to purchase their own home, which has been an exciting thing, especially given the current market, which is just crazy. Our estimates for the sales of those homes, I think were, just a few years ago, it's about a third higher overall. So it's absolutely crazy what houses are selling for right now. And I know I'm running through these fast, but I only got a couple left here. The next one, if you're driving down 13th, right before you hit the fairgrounds, this is another Lane County partnership we had. It's called the Keystone, and this is our first development that's geared for homeless families. And so these people will come off the centralized wait list, and they'll be on shelter care will be providing services. And again, for families that are currently homeless, and these are 2 and 3 bedroom units. There's only 15 of them. But it's a nice smaller development that fits well into the neighborhood. And This is one upcoming, and then I'm kind of moving into this one's currently under construction. Will be done in October. The next one is called The Nell, and this is if you imagine the corner of 11th and Charnelton. So it's directly across 11th from the Catholic Church. It's currently it was the Poole Larson Funeral Home, and Trauma Healing was living there, and we bought the site hoping we could work with the existing building, but it's been neglected for so many years that wasn't possible. And this one's kind of modeled after the Commons and MLK, where it'll be also for small studios for folks coming out of homelessness. And the whole ground floor will be supportive services. On both the Keystone and this development, we've kind of seen a shift in how neighborhoods are reacting to affordable housing also. It used to be always, no matter what it was a battle. And in both the case of the Jefferson West Side neighborhood and the Downtown Neighbors Association, I can't give enough credit to both of those neighborhoods and how much they've embraced and even helped out with us being able to get these developed. Now this one's 45 very small studio units, and this one will be, instead of shelter care, we'll be partnering with Laurel Hill Center. And then we're also trying to get more done in rural Lane County. As you all know, there was the fire up the McKenzie River, the Holiday Farm fire, and we're very active in helping Lane County deal with this and the folks that were displaced by this. And one of the mobile home park that was completely burned was called Lazy Days, and we're in a purchase and sale agreement there to buy this, and are hoping to be able to rebuild either manufactured homes or tiny homes, or do some type of community land trust, and so we're kind of working in the due diligence on that, which is just way different than whatever I'm used to, because everything's been burned, and about done here. There's this is another exciting one that was again in partnership with Lane County. They've really facilitated a lot that Homes for Good can do. They've been great partners, and this was called Project Turnkey, and this was the red line on East Broadway, which I don't know anybody actually knew existed, but it's between the McDonald's and the Pizza Hut. And the state put out money, and they call it Project Turnkey, to purchase hotels to house people impacted by the Holiday Farm fire. And then once we found permanent housing for those folks, we're going to convert it to permanent supportive housing to serve people struggling with homelessness. So as you can see, we're really concentrating on the homeless issue here. Yep, and then we have several potential future developments. We own some land in Glenwood that for years now we're and are looking forward to doing 100 to 150 units of some type of affordable housing in Glenwood. We're really looking at Florence, Cottage Grove, Crestwell, Junction City. All of those, particularly Florence, is really struggling with housing because of their rental population. We're also looking at doing partnerships with early learning hubs and actually doing some on-site things for preschool kids. And then we continue to work with Lane County to look for future permanent supportive housing sites, and City of Eugene. A few of the sites that they have that we're hoping we can work on are the Naval Reserve site and the site out on 34th and Hilliard. And I apologize for so many slides and the fast talking, but I am done.
Thank you. I think you actually stayed right inside your time. Thank you a lot. That was great. Dan, Bryant, do you want to follow up with this? And
oops, I'll quit
Okay.
sharing if I can figure out how to.
Yeah, give me the shareability here.
so you just have to hit screen share, Steve.
Stop share. That big red button.
And one other question, Dan Hill, you still with us? Where's Dan Hill?
You're muted, Dan.
You're muted, yeah.
There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, okay, so Dan, just one thing I want to straighten out with you. I do have your slides ready to put up if you weren't able to do that. I did a
Yeah,
backup.
I'm gonna try. I've got them on my laptop right now, so if it doesn't work, I'll come back to you and you can screen share, but I think I can do it.
Okay,
So
I just
I've
made
got
you
a strong enough signal here that should work. So
Okay, when it's your turn, you now have you have that capability now. Okay.
great, thank you.
Thanks. Did it, Dan, Bryant?
All right. Screen sharing is still disabled.
What? Let me see. Did I not make you co-host? Make co-host.
You did, but I think when you activated Steve or somebody else, it turned it
Okay.
off. Oh,
All right, now you should be able to do it.
okay. Still disabled.
Well, now you're on there twice.
Pam, why don't you
Yeah,
make,
ignore the one that's my phone, the one that's just a picture of me. Ignore that one.
Okay.
There we go. Got it. Okay, now if I did this right, you should be able to see just the single picture, right?
Yep.
Yeah, which is a picture of the home that Dan Hill designed for us for SquareOne Villages. So he can follow up with that. As I said, we've done a lot of work together over the years. So I want to just tell the story very briefly of SquareOne and how at least I, as a preacher, got into this business of building affordable housing. We started our nonprofit, SquareOne Villages, back in 2012 and built our first project, Opportunity Village Eugene, in 2013, and that I like to call a gated community for the homeless. Built it over 9 months with a lot of volunteers, a lot of donations of labor as well as materials, and became I think, a very attractive little community for about 30 to 35 people, where the average length of stay is somewhere between 12 to 18 months until people are able to move out into other housing. 30 units in all of bungalows and conestogas. These are just simply detached bedrooms. Up until this year, had no electricity. We now have solar power on 20 of them, and we'll be adding electricity for the remaining 10 so that everyone at least has heat during the winter. And then they have a shared bathhouse and a kitchen and pantries with cooking utensils, an outdoor cooking area. But our biggest problem was helping the villagers to transition out to find affordable housing. And we discovered we had a significant number. They were ready, they had income, they just couldn't find the housing. And at that time, when Homes for Good, what was then called HACSA, published the wait times to get into those various complexes that Steve spoke about earlier. I was rather stunned when I looked at that and discovered that a wait time for a 3-bedroom apartment was about 1 year. This is for the units in the Eugene area. For 2 to 4 bedrooms, it was 2 to 3 years. But for a single bedroom or a studio apartment, even the smallest they had, something for a single individual or a couple like my friends Juan and Rhonda here who live in that little yellow cabin, the wait time was over 6 years. And that's when we decided as a nonprofit that we needed to get into the business of building our own affordable housing using this village model that we had developed as a transitional shelter for the homeless. And so our first project, Emerald Village Eugene, off of Railroad and Polk in the Whitaker community, is an acre of land that we bought in 2015 through fundraising. We involved many of the residents themselves that we had selected for the homes there, involved them in the building process here with Mayor Kitty at the time, who now happens to be our board chair at the groundbreaking ceremony. And then we recruited 13 different architects, and a lot of that was with Dan's help, to design, build and donate, in many of these cases, these tiny homes to us. So we have this very eclectic design of all these different homes, 22 different homes in this project, and 14 of them built by those 13 teams of architects and builders, and then 8 of them built by our nonprofit. And these are not cheap homes, they're very quality. This is the inside of that home that Dan designed. They're just tiny, but they have a kitchenette, you got your bed, you got a bathroom, living space, the basic things you need. And this does qualify as a dwelling unit under the International Residential Code. These units range in size from our smallest of 160 square feet to our largest over 300 square feet that is actually a 2-story home. And most of them all have lofts. Technically, they're storage lofts, but a loft is really critical in a tiny home just to have space for things. And you might want to store your mattress up there, but you know, whatever the case may be. Similar to a manufactured home park, there's a clubhouse, a larger building that has a meeting space, a place where you can have, you know, your committee meetings, board meetings, a full-size kitchen, laundry facilities. In this case, also solar panels. A couple of other homes also have solar panels on them, and garden beds and the like. Critical in this kind of development is also the open space. Pay attention to the open space, because in a tiny home, you spend a lot of your time outside your home. And this is also important to strengthen the sense of community. And so as much as possible to have doors facing each other so that it encourages engagement with your neighbor. And I love the way that our residents here have claimed it for their own, designed, you know, various things, added their own artwork, their own vegetation around their homes to really make it their own home. Unlike most affordable housing projects, the residents of Emerald Village are not simply renters, however. They actually own the co-op that leases the facility from the nonprofit, and they have a share value. So their share value in this case, this is a leasehold co-op, is $1,500. So they have an asset, a very modest asset, but more importantly, they have an ownership stake in their housing, and therefore they're more apt to take responsibility for it. And we like to say we're not just building housing, you know, we are building a village, we are building community. And there's just absolutely something wonderful, magical that happens when you hand over that key to a new resident who never dreamed of having their own home. And especially when you develop a relationship between that resident and the builder, and they get to know each other. And there's a, you know, a really deep connection there that's just a powerful thing to experience. We couldn't have done this project without all of these folk like Dan Hill and the other architects. This is Paul Duster pictured here, who donated so much of their services and their homes. The in-kind donation from these builders and the architects was nearly $500,000, and that's was really key to making this project affordable. And one of the interesting things about this project is that we did not anticipate was the age of the applicants. Over half our applicants were over the age of 60. Gib here, that lives in the home that Dan built, is in his mid-70s. He's a veteran, very gentle soul, wonderful man. And I think in retrospect, we probably would have put a little more emphasis on accessibility to these units. To take that age of the residents into account. Another of our senior citizens, Alice here, she lived at Opportunity Village for a couple of years. She thought she could retire on Social Security income, and lo and behold, it wasn't enough. She became homeless within a year after her retirement, camped out for summer, and then came to the village. And when she moved into this 200 square foot home, she told us she thought she was going to spend the rest of her life living in a shelter. Then there's LeBeau, a very colorful individual. He picked the colors for his own home. He painted it. He put in over 400 hours of sweat equity into his home. LeBeau told us at our fundraiser, that's him speaking at the left there, that This was literally a lifesaver. He was forced to live in a domestic violence situation because he could not afford to move out. And so having his own home now, quite possibly could have saved his life. And he's quite proud of it. Every time I go to the village, and I bring someone with me, he always wants to show off his home. He's so proud of it. So then we took this model to see if we could do it in a rural community. So we bought an acre of land in Cottage Grove where we created Cottage Village. So a project of 13 tiny homes. We lowered the cost of the share to just $500 to make it a little bit more affordable for the folks there. The cost of this project, I should say the cost of Emerald Village was under $80,000 per home. This project, it's closer to 110, primarily due to economies of scale that we had in Eugene because we could put 22 homes to an acre, whereas here we could only put 14, and your infrastructure cost is almost the same. So you divide that over 14 homes instead of 22. So those are the kind of code issues I mentioned earlier. In this case, a zoning issue of how many homes you can build, how dense you can build it makes a big difference in the affordability. We're now working on a project we call Peace Village. It's in the Santa Clara neighborhood. We are actually purchasing this church, Peace Presbyterian Church, and their property that has nearly 2 acres of vacant land where we will be able to build, we think maybe up to 70 units on this home, on this land. And will be structured similarly to Emerald Village with one difference that I'll come to. We had another piece of property in the Train Song neighborhood donated to us of 3.5 acres that we're hoping maybe in 4 or 5 years to build an even larger project. And then our smallest project is in Springfield, and we're really excited about this project. We call this a micro village. It looks like a conventional home, and it has an accessory dwelling unit behind it. But if you look closely, you notice that staircase. These are actually 2 units, one stacked on top of the other, while the home is divided into 4 units. So it's a quad, and basically identical units stacked on top of each other. And so we're able to get 6 units into a single lot, standard lot size. And the total cost of this project is about $600,000. So the cost per unit is just $100,000. So again, making it much more affordable using taking advantage of the accessory dwelling unit and this ability to convert the home into a quad. Now, the ownership structure of this model in particular is what we're going to replicate with that larger project at Peace Village. And that's what I want to spend the rest of the time talking about. We call this our village model. Technically, it's a combination of a limited equity co-op with a community land trust. Housing co-ops are not particularly new. They've been around for a long time, especially on the East Coast where apartment buildings have been converted to co-ops. Tenants, when it got word a building was going to be sold, tenants banded together, formed this co-op, bought the house or the apartment building from the owner, ran it as a co-op. And the difference between a co-op and a condominium is in a condominium, you own your actual unit. In a co-op, you own a piece of everyone's unit. So if there are 50 units, you own 1/50th of your unit and 1/50th of everyone else's unit. So they tend to be very democratic in the way that they're run. But one of the problems with these co-ops is that when land prices and housing prices shot up, people saw an opportunity to cash out. They owned it, they could. And so they sell it, take the earnings, move to Florida or something. I don't know where they went, but that happened in many cases on the East Coast. So the difference in what we're doing is we combine this with a community land trust that owns the land. And that way the co-op has a ground lease with the community land trust. The community land trust stewards the property and basically ensures that it remains affordable in perpetuity. And there is, by the structure of the ground lease and the bylaws of the co-op, the members of the co-op can't cash out. They can't sell it. They can't sell it at market. they can sell it to another person at a predefined rate of appreciation, so to protect their investment. But they're not going to get, a huge gain because otherwise it will no longer be affordable if you allow it just to rise with the market. And so when you combine the two, what you do is you take the cost of the land out of the housing equation, so that saves you some money. And then the co-op only pays for their housing. And we're doing that both on the micro level with those 6 units as well as with this larger project with 70 units. So a couple of big benefits to the structure. It's resident-owned housing, and that is always preferable to rental, I think. Well, I shouldn't say always, usually preferable to rental for several reasons. For the resident, it increases their financial stability. It gives that residence, the asset of the property, and therefore they're much more likely to take care of it. And it allows them to build equity, and it gives them more control over their housing. It is up to the co-op to raise the price, not the community land trust. If they can't meet their budget, then they have to decide, are we going to cut expenses or are we going to raise the cost of the lease in order to manage this? And they also share in the management task. There's no landlord. They are the landlord. And so they form committees to share in the management tasks of running the co-op. And then the challenge becomes of how to finance that, and you have to develop very specific finance strategies for that. We're actually working on a bill in the Oregon legislature, HB 3368, that will provide $10 million to finance these kind of projects and to create a new model through Oregon Housing and Community Services for financing community land trusts and limited equity co-ops. So if we are successful in that, then we'll have a tool that'll make it easier to finance these projects in the future. But otherwise, a portion of the finance is carried by the residents themselves through a more traditional mortgage that then they are paying off in time. But that's only, at most about a third of the cost of building the project, because otherwise it won't be affordable for those residents. Our goal is to make these projects at about the rate of 60% of the area median income, so that it becomes very affordable for those families. At our website, which is just villagemodel.org, you can find more about this whole structure and strategies for financing a village and plans for tiny homes. This website and this whole program was developed with a grant from Meyer Memorial Trust to help us promote this model around the state of Oregon. So in closing, I'll just take you back to Emerald Village, Eugene, where we had a wonderful local artist, some of you may know, Carrie Johnson. Is that her name? Yeah, Carrie, who worked with the villagers for over 2 months to create this beautiful mural on this wall that was a very ugly wall with a lot of graffiti, with scenes of new life, a butterfly, forest recovering after a fire, and at the very end you see this bonfire with a phoenix rising out of the ashes. I think that pretty much says it all in terms of giving new life for the folks that live there. And we like to say that it all starts at square one. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Dan Hill. And let me find my cursor and turn my screen share off.
Man, you guys are really sticking to your time limits. It's amazing. You're gonna have.
We like to leave time for questions.
Yeah, well, they're looking at this way. It's great.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Let me
You
see
need
here.
screen share.
See if I can get my screen share up there. Can you see that okay?
Yes, I can.
Hang on just a second. I'm going to turn the volume up so I can hear you there. Let me try one thing here. I want to see if I can make that a full screen here. I know there's a button you can do that, and I'm not the most tech savvy person here.
The green button, Dan.
Oh, the green button. That's right. There it is. How about that? Well, first of all, thank you so much. I apologize for all my technical difficulties here at the beginning of the meeting. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you folks and just share a little bit different perspective than my friend Steve Ochs and my good friend Dan Bryant. I'm going to talk about more of a market rate or a for-profit model of housing and how we add that component. But I do want to share just a few things at the beginning of that. My passion for over 3 decades has been to use a lot of my free time to assist in building homes for those that don't have homes. My history of this started, and Dan Bryant was part of it in the early years, a group called Mission to Mexico, where we took high school and college kids down to Mexico to build housing for the homeless in northern Mexico, Baja, and Sonora. And we've built over 105 homes in Mexico over the last 30 years. And what it taught me is that housing is a really, really important thing to an individual's existence. And by that, what I mean is that you can't have good mental health, you can't have good physical health, you can't have good spiritual health unless you have a place to lay your head that you feel secure, that you feel a place where you can have some hope that every day when you get up, you have a place that you can call your own. And so as an architect and a builder, I've just always kept that at the forefront of my mind, whether it's building for someone that doesn't have a home or building a home for somebody that does have resources. It really it doesn't change the equation, from the standpoint that the necessity of good quality housing is really, really important. I also just want to mention a couple things with Dan Bryant here. I'm so appreciative and humbled by the opportunity to have worked with SquareOne Villages as a consultant since they started their concept. I just really love the model that SquareOne Villages has created, where there's an equity position in this. I think, again, pride of ownership is another piece that I think is really underestimated in the value of creating equity, but also just feeling like you're part of a neighborhood and not just a transient person in that neighborhood. And ownership is a big part of that. So what I want to do is just focus on a few things that are related to infill housing. And I'm going to show you some examples. Dan took some of my thunder on Gibbs House, but I'll run through it again just to talk about that house in a little bit more detail. We've been working on a lot of infill housing for many years. We've done some really neat projects in the Eugene Springfield area dating back almost 30 years ago. One that you might be familiar with is the very first cluster subdivision in Eugene, Oregon, called the Arbors. It's on West 18th out by Churchill High School. I did that project with a really good friend, Carl Isle, like I said, over 30 years ago. And it was a great example of how you take a 1 acre lot and create 8 housing units, which at the time was almost unheard of. It ended up being an national award-winning project. And unfortunately, the cluster subdivision concept really didn't catch on in Eugene like we were hoping it would. House Bill 2001 has been causing a lot of angst. I sit on multiple committees with the city, and I have offered a lot of input to the city of Springfield's accessory dwelling code as well. And the thing that I've realized is that fear is usually the common denominator here. What will somebody do on their lot next to my house? And that's always the biggest challenge, to try to just calm people down and say, hey, you can do some really, really neat, great stuff if you put good creative thought behind it and good problem solving. As I mentioned, there's lots of barriers to this, and I'm gonna just scroll down. This is a couple of examples of projects that we're working on. This is a little ADU, really simple little plan of a living, dining, bedroom, bathroom. This one even has a garage for either storage or potentially an automobile. Again, very small footprint, 680 square feet. This is a project that I designed, built, and actually still own, called the Blossom Cottages. It's on River Road. It's 8 little 670 square foot cottages. They are 20 by 30 foot footprint cottages. And these are really wonderful little spaces. Originally, my goal was to create this as a for sale product, but unfortunately, the codes made it really difficult to do. The planning codes, the public works requirements, just added so much cost, utility costs with eWeb. In 2 line items, we wanted to connect the sewer and have just a single meter from eWeb for the water, and neither entity would allow us to do that. So those 2 line items added $120,000 of cost to this project. And so we ended up not being able to sell these as individual homes. We probably could have sold these overnight because our price tag would have been under $200,000 a piece. Where can you buy a really nice, little, well-built, energy efficient cottage? I'm going to come back to that one, that has a great room, a great little bedroom, bathroom, a loft like Dan talked about, and a little office. These are really cute little units. And literally people call all the time asking me if I would sell them one of these cottages. And again, I'm going to just, I'm going to go back to the site plan here. This is a very long, narrow property. It was a very difficult lot to design on, but we were able to use an adjustment review process with the city, because River Road is such a very busy road, to create a buffer with our parking, as you can see in the front, and then cluster the cottages towards the back of the lot to remove it from traffic that moves up to 50 miles an hour down River Road. And it's surprising, just by moving the houses back 50 to 60 feet, what a difference it makes in the quality of the living environment. So these are some of the challenges that we deal with the planning codes and the Public Works Department to develop and deliver this type of a product, to the general public. I think one of the biggest things, I'm going to call it the elephant in the room these days, and I just want to say my hat's off to Steve Ochs. I've known Steve a long time, and I love our nonprofits in the Eugene Springfield area. I think St. Vinny, Terry McDonald, Steve with Homes for Good. Let's see, obviously Shelter Care. I'm losing my names right away, but they're all really, really wonderful organizations, and they're doing really, really good work. But this is what I come back to, and this is the challenge and the struggle, is we cannot solve the housing problem by just a subsidized model. The cost of subsidized housing, or capital A, capital H housing, affordable housing, is some of the most expensive housing that we build. And I think Steve will back me up on this. These units usually run anywhere now between $250,000 to $300,000 per door per unit, which is a huge cost to the taxpayer. And while it's very necessary, we have to, as a community, come to grips with delivering a product that is a market rate driven as well, that is affordable, because that's the majority of the market. It's not the affordable housing market. And so we have to be really careful about how we look at our struggles and our issues within our community, and where we're going to go over the next 10 to 20 years with solving these problems. So again, these are some pictures of, that was the last picture of the Blossom Cottages project. So this was the house that Dan had up on his screen. This was Gibbs Diggs is what we called it. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is that I love the model of SquareOne Villages. And the thing that's so neat about this project was, for us, is it was an experiment to see what we could design in a very small footprint. Again, you can look at the plan. It's got a bed alcove, a little living kitchen dining area with a kitchenette wall, a full bathroom, water heater closet, and then a storage loft. This is a very high quality home, super insulated. In fact, we designed this to a LEED Platinum standard. I don't know if you're familiar with LEED. It's a national US Green Building Council standard. Even though it wasn't certified, we still use that metric to deliver this house at a very high level of energy efficiency and sustainability. The reason that I want to show you this is I think this could be a huge part of the future of a neighborhood like Friendly Areas neighborhood area. And the reason being is this is a 235 square foot home. It could be a wonderful little ADU. And we know that we can build this house for probably at a market rate level for probably around $75,000 to $80,000. Again, where can you buy a brand new, beautifully energy efficient home for that kind of money? So that doesn't count the land cost because you already own the land. If that's, if that's something that you desire and you have the room on your lot to do something like that. This can be a great income generator for a private owner as well. So we see this House Bill 2001 as a real boost to the potential of our housing stock. The challenge is, again, trying to get the city to get on board and reduce the systems development charges, some of the permitting fees, and work with us to make sure that infrastructure is available within these established neighborhoods like Jefferson West Side, East University, your neighborhood, Friendly neighborhood. All neighborhoods that are older have these challenges. And so these are the things that I think we need to be really pushing our leadership in our both at the city level, but also at the county level too, looking at some of the areas in the River Road property. And I know Lori's on board with us here tonight, as a county commissioner. And these are things that I just think are so important to the health of all of our neighborhoods, because we need to create housing within our urban growth boundary. So this is a little different product. This is actually my business partner's accessory dwelling. It's a really cute little house next to his house in the Jefferson West Side. This is a much more expensive model, but again, we need to look at the demographic. Not all housing has to be targeted just towards those that are homeless or that are well below the AMI. And so I think that we have to be really careful to say, if in diversity, we have to meet all housing sectors, and that includes the lower, the middle, and even the upper end. So I wanted to show a couple of pictures of what a really higher end ADU could look like on a property. This is a site plan showing the main house and how that connection between the main house and the accessory dwelling is. It's got a beautiful landscaped area that's shared between the two houses. And this is on the corner of 14th and Lawrence. So you're welcome to drive by and take a look at that. Again, this is a 2-bedroom ADU. It fits under the 800 square foot model. So it has a lot of really neat things about it. This is another one that we're working on right now. We're actually gifting this house to a young man who was recently paralyzed in a timber falling accident. A 15-year-old boy was crushed by a tree. His father is an arborist that we work with. But again, a really cute little 500 square foot kind of studio style accessory dwelling. Let's see, I know my time is just about up, so I'm going to just stop right there. I know we have our Q&A coming up here. I'll just finish up by saying, barriers are the challenge, and they're not only with the things that I already mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, but obviously costs right now. Construction costs are hugely expensive. I believe Steve kind of touched on that in his presentation. Lumber is 250% of what it was literally 8-9 months ago. And these are things that are putting more stress on our housing stock. A roll of copper wire that used to be $30 is now $110 a roll. So all the pressures that builders and developers are having, not only on the nonprofit side, but also on the profit side, continues to put a burden on our housing stock. And those of us that are fortunate to live and own a home, we're becoming, yeah, envied, I think, by a lot of the marketplace. We also have a large population that is wanting to move to Oregon. I read an article recently that said Oregon is now, I think, the second or the third highest migrated to state in the country right now. I believe behind Idaho, and I can't remember what the other state was. And obviously, there's a lot of reasons: our natural environment, our our healthy, I think, standard of living, just the recreational opportunities. But also, I believe Oregon is a compassionate state, and I think these are all really great things about living in Oregon. But if our housing becomes so expensive that most people cannot afford it, then what happens is what happened in the Bay Area, some 25, 30 years ago, where an old home will sell for $1,000 a square foot. And not many people can afford that kind of housing. And so, my recommendation to all neighborhoods is to, work with architects and builders, that have creative solutions for creating more housing. I love what Steve did. I was on the design review project of the Legion housing down in Cottage Grove, where you take a lot and you put 4 really wonderful little cottages there. What Dan is doing in Springfield, we call it mansion housing, where you take a house that looks a little bigger, but you have 4 units in it. There's so many creative ways to create quality, affordable housing. And so I'm really excited about some of the things that have been changed through our state legislature with HB 2001, and just what different organizations like SquareOne is doing, and Cornerstone is doing, and Homes for Good are doing. So I think I used up my time. So.
Thank you. Thanks. Wow. Margie, are you going to take over the MC for the question Q&A?
Yes, I would be happy to. So I encourage people to throw your questions into the chat box, and we will start. We have a couple. This is a question for Dan Hill. You mentioned the risk of demolition and gentrification with HB 2001. Do you think Portland's affordable housing density bonus, which allows 6 plexes to be developed if they're affordable, is a good solution to this issue?
Am I still? Oh, I'm unmuted there. I'm on a roundtable committee about the infill housing in Eugene, and this has come up many times about, is this a good model? I think it is a good model, but I think it's just one model. Again, the challenge for companies like ours is we are a for-profit corporation. And, we're probably one of the rare companies that we try to give back a lot to our community. But unfortunately, developers and builders, they look at things like a pro forma. And if you're not familiar with a pro forma, it's basically saying, I can build this product, I can sell it for this much money, I can get this kind of a return on my investment. And so the model is sometimes also dictated not only by a reasonable profit margin, but it's also dictated by what banks will loan on. And so in the pro forma process, what happens is you will have to show, for an example, on an income property, a minimum of a 6.5% return on your pro forma to be able to get funding for a project. Most people don't realize that in the private sector development, that our skin in the game, the equity positions are usually in the 30% range. It's very rare to get a loan for much more than 65, 70% of the cost. So there's a lot of upfront cost just to develop any type of project. So when you say that half of those projects that you build, have to meet a benchmark of affordability, sometimes that just doesn't work in the pro forma. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I would say it's one of a big pot of really good solutions.
Thank you. Steve, I think it was Steve, but Beth might have also mentioned about helping with the weatherization of existing low-income homes. Does Homes for Good buy trailer parks? Like I know St. Vinny's does that to some degree.
We haven't yet really got the first one we've purchased or in the process of purchasing is the one up the McKenzie River. So we haven't gotten into that yet. It could be a direction we go, but right now with the permanent supportive housing and kind of other projects in the pipeline, that won't be our priority. But I know, it's a big, there's a big need to keep that existing stock out there. And so we have worked with CASA just recently and helped, I guess, sign on some documents to kind of, so that lenders would give them money to do things. So, but we haven't yet gotten the manufactured home business. But.
Thank you.
And I did just want to add on a little bit to what Dan was saying earlier about the different types of housing. A big problem we're seeing is that there's affordable, which is for a certain AMI. There is such a big gap between folks coming out of our affordable developments to market rate that people can't make the jump. So they're staying in, they're making a lot more than what's required in the affordable, but they can't afford to make that jump to market rate. And so it's really, that's really a problem. So it's not making room for anybody else to move through that continuum of housing either. So.
Are there other questions?
Heather has a question.
Oh, Heather. Oh, okay. I'm falling behind on so Ethan wrote, to Dan, you mentioned we need to focus on affordable housing for all residents, not just those that fall into the affordable housing market. The city identified 13,500 unit deficits of rentals affordable for 32% of the Eugenians who can afford rent on 625 or less. Meanwhile, there is a surplus. The city has actually identified a 4,800 unit surplus of rentals available to those who can afford 1,000 a month. How does this build into the challenge of providing housing?
Is that question for me or for Dan Bryant?
Yeah, it's got your name by it, Dan.
Oh,
and if you look in chat, you can see it.
I just saw it. I just saw that. I'm sorry, Margie. This is what I know about the rental housing, market. We own some market rate apartments and obviously the Blossom Cottages. I hadn't heard that statistic that there's a surplus of 4,800 units. In fact, I've heard just the opposite of that there's a shortage of even market rate. I know that most of our projects, we have waiting lists on the rolls for from what our property managers tell us is that there's a waiting list. So I'm not really sure about that number and where that came from. I do think the challenge again is our income level for the Eugene Springfield area, in that $44,000 a year range. People become very housing cost burden, let's just say, where you're paying 35, 40, 50% of your income on your housing. It's really, really difficult to get ahead. Again, cost of housing has increased. I'm going to give you my perspective, and I'm not going to say that this is the only perspective. but our land costs, you used to be able to buy a lot in Eugene not that many years ago for $25,000 or $30,000. The same lot today is $150,000. The permits and SDCs for a home used to be in the $1,500 to $2,000 range. Today, they're pushing $30,000 for a 2,000 square foot house. The cost of a water meter used to be a few $100s. Now it's $3,000. The other challenge that we have, I think, on the open market is the issue of, I'm going to call it affordable labor. We have one of the highest labor rates for our construction workers of anywhere on the West Coast. We have a shortage of qualified construction workers, and I'm one of those people that I'm really grateful for our friends south of the border, not just because I've spent so many years down there working, but the fact that we have some skilled labor that has come up from south of the border. When I was a young carpenter, I would say 80–90% of the construction trades were people that looked like myself, and unfortunately, we don't have a lot of young people that want to work in the construction trades. And so when you have a shortage of qualified labor, the cost of labor goes up. We pay, for an apprentice electrician, $75 an hour now. Apprentice plumber can be $50 an hour. Just a normal carpenter starts at, $30–$35 an hour. That's not a journeyman. And so when you start adding those hours up, the labor costs now have gotten so extreme in our area. So these are challenges that, again, that put pressure on the housing stock, and not only the new housing stock, but also on the remodel side when we need to retrofit houses. Yeah, John Ochs mentioned, the concept of how do we make our older homes more energy efficient. That's not an inexpensive process, and for most people, it's out of their reach unless there's, financial assistance or help. This is a really big problem, and it's so hard to cover in just a few minutes. There's structural problems with the way we've looked at our housing over the last 30 years in the Eugene Springfield area, and we're not alone. It's many communities that are struggling with this. So I don't know if I've answered the question or just added more confusion here. So.
Well, I wanted to add that Ethan added in the chat the document from the city with the housing numbers, just for folks. And also earlier, Lori Traeger had noted a link to Lane County's housing plan, affordable housing plan. So that's also in the chat, if that's something you're interested in. Next question. The community is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on chemical toilets for rest stops and microsites. Can you speak to how Opportunity Village addresses this challenge? So, Dan?
Yeah, so there's a whole larger issue, and it's the challenge of how much you spend on emergency shelter versus permanent housing. And it's a real dilemma because the solution is permanent housing. But yet we also have a crisis, and it's all very visible. So we've, and particularly as we think about winter, to make sure that we're doing everything that we can, that the current folk that are out there, that well over 2,000 people, the homeless by name list identifies closer to 5,000 people in a 30-day span who are without housing, without shelter. And so it's a huge number. And it is frustrating. So I know at Opportunity Village, when we started, we had porta potties. And by the time we got up to 30 people, we were literally flushing $500 a month down the toilet. And it finally dawned on us, it would just make sense to build a bathhouse, hook it up to the sewer, and we would save a lot of money. And we got a grant from Rotary, and volunteers came and built that bathhouse for us so that we could, wean ourselves from the porta potties. We spent about $8,000 on that bathhouse, 2 toilets, a shower, and a laundry facility. And so do the math. I mean, it's if we were still spending $500, that's $6,000 a year, $42,000 over the course of the life of the village. I mean, it's paid for itself many times over. But of course, when you're putting up a temporary camp somewhere in a field, there's not a possibility to hook it up in any way to a bathhouse. What else are you going to do? Of course, you've got to spend the money on those chemical toilets, unfortunately. And I know the city is thinking probably that they're going to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million to support those camps for the next year. I would much prefer, if I had my druthers, to put that money to build permanent housing. But the problem is, if I spent $5 million on Emerald Village Eugene style housing, that's very cost efficient, we could build housing for about 60 to 80 people. And meanwhile, there are 3, 4, 5,000 people out there who need shelter. So it's an awful dilemma, and I don't know a solution except that we can't let the emergency crisis deter us from the solution, which is permanent housing. And so we've got to find better ways. And I've been on this soapbox for a long time. I love what Homes for Good is doing. They're building really quality, great housing. The problem is, Dan Hill pointed out, it's not affordable. It's only affordable because of the public subsidy that we put into it. How do we get that cost down so that instead of building housing for $250,000 to $300,000 a pop, we get it down to $100,000, $150,000 a pop? I think that's got to be the ultimate solution, so that we can get more bang for our buck with affordable housing dollars. And that may be challenging to do on the larger scale. It's a little easier for us to do as a small, nimble nonprofit. And tiny homes don't work for families with teenagers. I say putting a family with a teenager in a tiny home is a recipe for murder. So I don't recommend that. But 80 to 90% of our folks on the street are single individuals. They don't need 3-bedroom homes, just studios. So we've got to put more of our resources into building still quality but less expensive, smaller homes, so we get better bang for our buck. I'll get off that soapbox.
I want to
Steve
add.
or Beth?
I want to add one thing to Dan Bryant's comment about the portable toilets. I think it was it Claire?
Heather asked it.
Yeah.
Heather's.
So we're actually working right now with community supported shelters. I think some of you are familiar with their work. They're the ones that developed the Conestoga huts that you see around town at a lot of the safe spots. And they have the same issue with, the porta potty issue. And so we've been doing some research with them. We looked at doing a permanent structure, but again, to build a 4-stall bathhouse that has showers and toilets, it's $170,000, $180,000 to do that when you're connecting to the sanitary sewer and the water of the city, as well as power. So we've been looking at a modular unit that we think is a really great idea, and it's probably about 25 to 30% of that cost. And if the city would work with community supported shelters on that, and let them hook up to a sewer without huge, systems development charges, then all of a sudden we've taken that chemical toilet out of the equation. So I think there are creative solutions, and we're trying to look at options that make more sense, or at least use common sense in the way we're solving some of these issues. My office building is down on 4th and Lincoln, right very close to the Washington Jefferson Street Bridge, and I'm sure many of you are watching what's going on down there, and it's tragic to me. I drive by it every day, and I see the unbelievable amount of support that the city is giving those people down there through the porta potties, through food carts that show up, and tents and other things. But that's not a sustainable model. It's just not, and it's actually really hurting the businesses in that neighborhood, and so there's a lot of pushback. So we have to be, I think, much more active as neighborhoods, as business owners, as community members, of saying, let's think outside this box of what we've been doing. And again, I'm going to beat the drum of Dan Bryant here and SquareOne Villages, that it's mostly single people. And if we can figure out a model that is much more affordable and land bank through the city places to build these tiny houses, I think we can solve a lot of our housing, problems. So.
And next question is, does anyone know of models in which neighbors purchase lots and then develop housing in coordination with housing needs, rather than having developers front money for projects that then would require such large turnaround profit?
I don't. It's a great idea, though.
Yeah, I love the idea. If there's a
Why not?
neighborhood that wants to do it, I think it's wonderful. I think it shows ownership again in your community, in your neighborhood.
That was my question, and my question is mostly addressed to the issue of NIMBYism, of people not wanting infill housing, and if people were able to pool resources together so that we're actually working within our community to do something that we feel good about. And I say this as somebody who's built an ADU, and it was extremely expensive. And of course, it has to be market rate, because I have to pay my retirement fund back, for the expenditure of it. So it seems like community moving some kind of hybrid from the tiny house and some of these more affordable ADUs into neighborhood control might actually be worthwhile. I don't know how to jumpstart that, but I would definitely be interested in that myself.
I think, Claire, what I would just say is the cluster cottage, I'm going to be honest, I think it's one of the best absolute models that there is. And the reason being, what we've experienced through the Arbors, through another project that we did a few years ago called Friar Tuck Park, and then Blossom Cottages. What we've noticed is that it creates a sense of community. And when you have a lot of people, either singles or couples, that are living in close proximity, what we find is that there's a really healthy environment there, because people look out for each other. And especially as we age and we want to age in place, I think that that's a really important metrics to looking at housing, and so if a neighborhood group got together and said, hey, we've got a dumpy old house that's a half an acre and we can build 8 wonderful little cottages, let's do this together, and there might be a small return for every investor in that property, and then you have say and protection of the units that are around it. So I love the idea. I think it's a really positive idea.
Lori had as a comment, in addition to the capital to build, there is also the challenge of ongoing funding and providing the wraparound services for the PSH model. I don't know if that's
yeah, let me jump onto that, because and Steve referred to this a little bit earlier, selling the dispersed units to build one, a common facility. That's a basic economies of scale kinds of issue. So when you are providing services, and particularly with the permanent supportive housing kind of services, yeah, you probably have to do that so that you can concentrate those services in an area, not have staff spread out all over the city. That's a very inefficient way to do that. So I think we will always need that kind of style of housing that Homes for Good does so well. For the neighborhood project, though, I think either doing the cottage cluster that Dan just talked about, or our Springfield 6, we call it C Street. If you go to our website, SquareOneVillages.org, and the project tab, and drop down to C Street, you can see more information about it. I think that fits very well into a neighborhood, and I could see, a neighborhood pooling their resources to buy a lot and to do just that. Maybe form a little LLC, create your own nonprofit, or even do it for profit, but at a much more affordable price.
Yeah, and I'd also add there's organizations out there like Dev Northwest, I know has been delving more into the community land trust model also pretty successfully, and really which allows for the home ownership. And I was also going to add that kind of the financing source that we use for our developments only works for a 40 to 60 unit to about 2 acres style of development. And it's the tax credits, and they comes with so many expenses. Both Dan's mentioned the cost. Our cost is around $250,000 a unit, and those are in some cases just 1-bedroom units. We are subject to prevailing wage also, which is good for the local workers, but does add to the cost also. So there's definitely like the typical style of housing we do. We're trying to get creative with other styles also, but it doesn't allow for that infill type of development that is often needed in established neighborhoods. And I just add that the city of Eugene's done a good job of land banking in the past in providing land. Land is incredibly expensive. The Nell parcel, which we just recently purchased, that was, it's less than an acre downtown, it was $1.2 million. And, we were able to work with with Pacific Source to get some funding for land acquisition and things like that. But it's just not it's just unbelievably expensive right now. So.
Next, Pam was also noted, maybe we need to put some effort into raising wages as well to match wages to housing. Ethan had a comment about, he was kind of curious, more rhetorical about, well, if the Springfield 6 units are all built at 60 to 100,000, why can't we scale this to provide more affordable housing? Why are we wasting space building housing for 250,000? Doug was wondering about high density dorm style housing for singles.
That's called SRO, single resident occupancy. SROs historically were coded out of existence because they were considered to be undesirable. The clientele that lived there were people that we didn't want in our community. I'm interpreting here, someone else can disagree with me on that. And I think it's only recently that now we've come to realize that was a very bad decision we made, and I'm talking 30 years ago. And so there are now slowly, I think, some SROs that are coming back, but I don't know if maybe Steve or Dan has more information on those and how doable they are.
Yeah, I think, there's been a lot of study about SROs over the years. And the reason I think that they failed so miserably is that, unfortunately, the quality of housing, number one, the model itself just didn't really support, again, the things that I was talking about at the beginning, a place that you can feel really good about, a place that, you can call your own, that, increases the value of your life, basically as far as your quality of life. And so I think there's models that probably could be revisited with that type of housing. I haven't seen any really good ones yet myself, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible. One of the things I just, and Steve might talk about this a little bit. I wanted to go back to Ethan's. He said it's a rhetorical question, but I think it's one that needs to be visited. And again, believe me, I'm not picking, when I say this, I'm not picking on the nonprofits, because I've already said I really believe the work they do is really good. One of the challenges with a lot of the nonprofit housing is because it's publicly funded, there's a lot of extra costs that's related to public funding because of prevailing wages and other, I'm going to call it the paperwork and the bureaucracy that goes along with that. I've worked on some HUD projects myself, and it's very challenging. And so these things add amazing layers to the cost of housing. And so that's why we see a 35% increase from public housing or subsidized housing to private sector housing. And so, again, I'm going to beat the drum that we can't solve the housing crisis through a subsidized model. There's just not enough money in the world to do that. Everybody would be taxed 100%, so, and so we have to look at all these housing types. And again, what Homes for Good does is really important, but it's just one type of housing that is going to be, part of the solution package. So
Dan, let me just tack onto that. I didn't go into this in my presentation. The other beauty of the Springfield project, C Street, is that we financed it with social investors, private individuals who are willing to loan us their money, receive a return on it, but it may be a slightly lower rate that they might have gotten through some other investment. That's why we call them social investors. But we did pay them, they made a little profit off of it, but we didn't have to go to a bank. It was done all with private money. We didn't have to use any, go to Oregon Housing, any tax credit and once it's built, then the 6 individuals who move into it pool their resources. They will hold the debt, a collective debt, to pay off those private investors. So we'll get a more conventional mortgage, pay off most of the private investors. There's about 20% that will carry for another 10 years. And so traditional and yet non-traditional, but it enables us, that's what enables us to build it at a much lesser cost than something that is traditionally financed through public instruments.
And I guess I would add real quick just that because of the type of, so we use tax credits as our primary source of funding. And what happens is each state's given a certain amount of tax credits to allocate for housing, and then we competitively go after it throughout the state. And then a bank buys these tax credits, and they pay for about 70% of your overall costs with those tax credits. And then the remainder, you have to find some kind of gap funding. But what comes with that is that, you're required to keep 60 years of affordability through the state. So you have a, building that theoretically would last 60 years. And it has to be some kind of it has to be like Earth Advantage, LEED, or some level of, they have different levels you can choose. And then there's, like in the case of the Commons and MLK, where we're working with folks coming straight out of homelessness, there was, they added drains in rooms, things like that. If there's flooding, they hardened a lot of the surfaces so that there wouldn't be issues. So there was a lot of, there's a lot of other costs that comes with that. Then you add on, because of that kind of funding, there's 3 times or 4 times as many lawyers involved as a typical funding source. So, we were looking at, I think the downtown project we did was about a $16 million project overall. That included the commercial space also, but it's an enormous amount of money, but it's also a building you'll then be there for, affordable for a long time. So.
Well, we have more questions, and the conversation is very interesting and helpful, but we do need to move to public comment right now. And we do have 3 people that are interested in speaking.
Hey, Margie?
Yes.
I just wanted to say, in case any of our speakers needed to drop out, I just want to take a second to thank you so much before we go to public comment, just in case.
Yeah.
They need to go.
So, Lori, you are first up.
Great, thank you. This was a great conversation, and I'm going to segue to my public comment by reintroducing myself as your county commissioner. I'm a fan resident since 1995. I've been in the district since '87. I just put in the chat the link to my page on the county website, which includes my desk phone, my cell phone, and my email address. And I will say the Board of County Commissioners, we are 5 of the 7 members of the Homes for Good Board. So this is a topic very relevant to me in my role as a commissioner, but also just long time. If you read my page on the website, you'll see I've worked with a lot of the organizations that partner with the folks that have been presenting to you today, and on a lot of issues around affordability of housing and wages and livability in our community. I also want to say that I asked our county board, our county administrator, for us to name homelessness as a crisis and elevate it the same way we've elevated our work around COVID, and give us regular updates on our response to the crisis of homelessness, and in addition to regular updates on the implementation of our housing action plan. So our next update on the homelessness response on the county's part is May 25th. You can sign up to get agenda alerts for county commission meetings. We always have public comment at the start of our meetings. We also have a once a month evening public comment section. So just really encouraging folks to engage with the county on issues that are relevant to the county, and let you know that we are working hard on, particularly on permanent supported housing development and on the response to homelessness. I also want to ask you all and invite you all, if you haven't yet been vaccinated, to please do so. We have lots of appointments open. If you have been vaccinated, but anyone in your circle has not, to please encourage them to do so. Anyone that has any questions about the efficacy or the safety of the vaccine or getting access to vaccine is welcome to contact me. I'm happy to talk with folks about that. We are just about 20,000 doses away from meeting the governor's metric for putting Lane County permanently back into a low-risk category, in addition to submit our equity plan, which we actually already had in place. We just need to make some tweaks to it to accommodate her particular criteria and metrics. But we've been doing a lot of work at the county around equity in our vaccine rollout since very, very early on in the pandemic, partnering with community organizations to do culturally contextual and specific outreach and engagement with community-based organizations. But really just cannot urge folks enough to be part of really this global public health movement, and please take the vaccine and keep yourselves and your loved ones safe. And finally, I want to let you all know that I'll be participating in a virtual town hall with Representative Margie Woodell and City Councilors Matt Keating, Alan Zelenka, and Claire Syret on June 3rd. And I'll make sure to share to the friendly Facebook page that event, and also email it to your board chairs so they can share it out, and invite you all to join and attend that. And thank you so much. This was a great presentation, great conversation.
Thank you, Lori. Next up is Zondi. Not hearing you. Zondi, we're not hearing you, or I'm not hearing you. Why don't we move to Nathan and come back to you? Okay, Nathan? Oh, Ethan, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make sure it happens all the time. I got Nathan, Evan, I got various things over the phone. So I want to thank everybody for their time and for the presenters for going through those presentations today. I really like the amount of information we had and the variety of different ideas we had to solving the housing crisis. One of the, just kind of like something generally I wanted to touch on, and I brought this up at the budget committee last night, is different communities and neighborhood associations, all these different groups are constantly receiving feedback about like how to solve these crises. Also, they're receiving a lot of public comment, personal and professional recommendations, suggestions, and even grievances. And something that I've personally found just a little bit frustrating and even discouraging is, especially when it comes to the budget, the FY22 proposed budget that's being presented, and the CSI payroll taxes. The numbers that are initially presented never seem to reflect what the community is asking for where funds should go. So for the budget and the CSI, a lot of folks are saying, put money towards social services, put money towards permanent housing. And a lot of folks are saying, put funds away from the police department, reallocate those funds to preventative services, not reactionary services. But what's happening is we get numbers that don't reflect that gross output of feedback. A lot of it's still, well, we're going to give temporary housing. We're still going to give millions of dollars to the police department. So it's just something I wanted to share, and just some frustrations I'm having. It seems like a lot of unnecessary back and forth that's been going on since I've started paying attention to where money is going. And I assume is something that communities all around the country experience.
Thank you, Ethan. Sandy, you want to try again and see if we get it? I'm not hearing.
Your speaker's turned off.
Well, it was on, yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. We're having a board meeting on Monday, if you want to try again. So I think we're at time here now, and we'll close up the meeting. But again, I definitely want to thank Beth and Steve and the Dans for your time and your expertise and your examples. I know it has been very helpful to me, and I appreciate the conversation back and forth going on with folks. So thank you very, very much.
Yes. Great presentation, you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, neighbors, for coming. Appreciate it, and have a good evening.
Great.
Bye.